A cardiologist says the keto diet is based on fake news. Should you be careful? I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and I'm going to review another video sent to me from the plant-based organization, Plant-Based News. Of course, we have a little evidence of plant-based bias in the name, but I think it's helpful to go through the arguments and the rationale and to try to undo the concerns, if possible, that other individuals have about the keto diet. And a cardiologist especially, because we all know that the keto high-fat diets cause heart disease, right? Well, actually that's not true, but a lot of people have that false belief from, again, what I typically call the old paradigm belief system. Fat's bad, you gotta avoid saturated fat, sugar has a halo on it, don't worry about sugar, it's great. And so the paradigm gets people to believe things and see things in different ways. So here I have a video from Dr. Rob Ostfeld, and it's important to check the credentials. He's a US trained high-profile universities training and practices as a preventive cardiology, but in his bio it's pretty clear he likes to use plant-based approaches, which is great. There's evidence for that. But I wonder why he's got something wrong with the keto diet, because that apparently is not what he uses and has some concern about it.
As a cardiologist, I believe the keto diet is a mistake. The keto diet, I believe, is based on misinformation. And the general theme is that in the 1980s, the government told us to eat low fat. Then we ate low fat, and look at us now. We're fat and sick. It's a really nice narrative, but it's not true. We ate more of everything, including fat. So it's based, I think, on fake news.
Well, hang on. Sometimes I wonder where the science is, or that has anyone read the research that we have published now for over 20 years? It's not, so I thought for sure it would be some mechanism about chemistry or something, but the argument here is that because the low-fat diet didn't cause diabetes and this epidemic, therefore the keto diet can't be true. Well, I agree that that association is not causation, but it would be kind of like me with a ladder. I'm a fireman, and there's a kitten that's stuck up the tree, and I mean, my keto diet, my low-carb keto diet in my clinic is kind of like the ladder. I can go up there and I can save the kitty from the tree and bring it down, and the kitty's happy. To me, it's not so important how the kitty got up the tree. And it's not an argument that the ladder doesn't work if the kitty leapt from the house to the tree, or the kitty, anyway, you got the gist there. So to me, it's not so important how things got to today's mess of the epidemic of diabetes and obesity. You can argue left and right about why and who's to blame. What I know is that this ladder that I use, the keto diet, can reverse diabetes and reverse obesity and other metabolic problems. I do that every day, and we've studied papers for the last 20 years. So this video is not so long ago. These papers were out there. So often we get into silos and only read what is in our own little area, almost like a religion. I suppose I grew up Lutheran and Protestant, and I didn't really read much about other religions. I mean, it was serving me just fine, but I acknowledge there are other religions, and so like science, there are other ways to go about things, of course, hallmark of science is that you can replicate it. And it's not a religion. Science would embrace the idea that there are many different ways to reverse diabetes and lose weight, for example, in what we're talking about today. So anyway, that's not an argument to me that, the keto people say it was the low-fat movement that caused diabetes. The research today says that you can actually take the ladder up the tree, take the kitty down. Using, so reverse diabetes, reverse obesity with a low-carb keto diet. That's properly, instructed.
There is no long-living population that that is consistently in a state of ketosis. And the one population that often comes up is the Inuit population. They live very far north near the pole and they eat a lot of fish. Well, they have similar heart disease rates as people in Canada. And actually, the Inuit population, they've selected for a mutation that makes it harder for them to go into ketosis, suggesting that it is not evolutionarily beneficial to be in a chronic state of ketosis. And if you look at the longest living populations in the world, the blue zones with the most centenarians, their diet is more than 50% carbs and primarily plant-based.
Now, time out. This is a common theme where the question here is the keto diet based on fake news? Like, is it real, right? Is it just a hallucination or a delusion? To talk about what people have done in the past doesn't mean you can't do something in the future. It would be like Orville and Wilbur Wright saying there's never been any human-powered airplane flight, so there never should be. I mean, so I'm not persuaded to say that what I do today is fake because there are no population. Oh, and then you're introducing the comparison to plant-based things already. And we're only like 1/7 into the video. Although, wait, this is an anti-keto video, which I guess is really kind of the plant-based is best. So you got to claim some plant-based bias here. But let's keep going. This keto diet still is fake, right?
There's no low-carb population in the blue zones. And there's a really, really interesting population called the Siman people. They live in Bolivia, and there was an article about them in 2017 in Lancet. They're an indigenous population, and they have the lowest rates of heart disease ever recorded in the medical literature. And how do they know that? They did CAT scans of their hearts. Like, they literally flew down CAT scan machines, like into the jungles of Bolivia. It's amazing. Their heart disease rate, if you look at them compared to a typical Westerner, their artery age, pound for pound, is 25 years younger than ours. What's their diet? 72% carbs. Okay, so the longest living populations are eating more carbs. The Siman people, lowest rate of heart disease in the world, have 72% carbs. And if you look at what are some of the things you are leaving out?
Well, these people tried to fly. Those people tried to fly. Therefore, you shouldn't fly. No, so because people eat high carbs and don't have heart disease doesn't mean a different approach can't work. And that's an element of fallacy that you really need to be careful with. And it's used very expertly at times where, there's no population, there's the blue zone. Well, you can see in the blue zones what you want to see. Some of these people are eating fat, actually, but you can see what you want to see. I was taught some years ago in an article that I helped to co-author that you want to keep the insulin super low. There was an idea that those who live longest actually have very low insulin levels in the blood. So I've always been sort of focused on what's going on in the blood and the metabolism rather than what's on the plate. And actually, you may be able to accomplish the same thing internally by different elements on the plate, by what you see and what you eat. So the idea that no one else has ever done this, okay, well, maybe we can take an airplane and fly now. The new knowledge of nutritional ketosis. And what's always kind of made me pause or has kind of puzzled me is that every human goes into nutritional ketosis when you don't eat for 2 days. Just watch one of these reality shows where they're not eating anything for often 3 weeks. And they're shifting into nutritional ketosis pretty quickly. No one really talks about that. Of course, the first thing you have to do is get fresh water, boil it, and then shelter. And then they start looking for protein or any energy source. But what's happening internally very quickly with these folks is they're starting to be in nutritional ketosis. Their brain shifts from glucose mainly to ketones mainly, same with muscles and other organs. So the idea that it's something harmful, or oh my goodness, it reminds me, and this will date you and me, if you remember the Palmolive commercial, the dish soap commercial, and Madge is sitting there getting the nails done, and she goes, oh, you're soaking in it, and the horror that they're using this at the beauty salon. So actually, we're all in nutritional ketosis if we don't eat for 2 days. Oh, the horror. And then we're all in nutritional ketosis if you don't eat carbs for 2 days. So if you're just focusing on proteins and fats, your body is in what's called nutritional ketosis, which is very much like fasting. And so if you ever hear someone saying you need to fast and have intermittent fasting or get into that, really means fat burning. And it happens automatically on a low-carb keto diet. So if you're consuming knowledge and information out there, often the study leaders don't understand that fasting really means fat burning, and you can actually be in the fat burning mode while you consume food. So anyway, this idea that, well, no one has ever lived that, and actually my understanding of the Inuit population is different than his. And I visited the North climates and did a study outside of Vancouver, which led to a documentary film called My Big Fat Diet with Dr. Jay Wortman, who's a physician in the Vancouver area. I actually went to a diabetes conference in Ottawa about the traditional diets and heard a prominent nutrition expert say reluctantly that the Inuit got all the vitamin C they needed by eating meat. And then she said, but we still want you to have fruits and vegetables every day like the Canadian government tells you. So, I mean, this conference was some years ago, but I'm afraid the thinking hasn't changed much. So, no, when the Inuit were studied on their traditional diets, there was not the same chronic issues, chronic health disease. I think it was remarked that there was no cancer, even very little cancer, but there was, I think, a problem with nosebleeds. So, and that may have been to the fatty acid composition in the diet. No one really knows. But it's hard to get that information because, once you introduce someone who uses dog sleds to a snowmobile and they have access to snowmobiles, they're not going to go back to dog sleds unless they really, have a predilection toward that. So once the traditional foods got overwhelmed by the craft dinners, the macaroni and cheese, these people did not really escape that. So it's hard to find data from people who are untouched by the Western food. So, but back to Dr. Ostfeld and the keto diet based on fake news.
In the ketogenic diet, you're leaving out whole grains. You're leaving out fruit. Or almost all fruit, and you're leaving out pulses like beans and lentils. Mm-hmm. All of those things are among the healthiest foods in the world. If you eat, there was a wonderful study out of Lancet by Reynolds where they looked at 135 million person years of follow-up. That's a huge study. You follow me for 1 year in a study, that's 1 person year of follow-up. And they found the more whole grains you ate, the better you did. You lived longer, less heart disease, less cancer, less diabetes. Yeah, you ate more whole grains and you had less diabetes. You're leaving that out. How about the fruit? Similar kind of data. Dr. Du found in a huge population out of China, like 500,000 people worth, published in the New England Journal of Medicine and PLOS Online, the more fresh fruit you ate, the better you did. The less heart disease, the less high blood pressure, the less diabetes. Yes, you ate more fresh fruit and you had less diabetes. I'm kind of getting sick of hearing about how fruit causes diabetes.
Time out. So the studies that he cites are the nutritional epidemiology studies, the ones where you can see what you want to see. But now there's a nutritional study, epidemiology study out of the McMaster University called the PURE study. And they're actually not finding the same things that were found in these other studies, largely done by the Harvard Nutritional Epidemiology Group. So anyway, that's association, not causation. And I'm sorry if you're getting tired about fruit causing diabetes, because fruit raises the blood glucose. In the context of someone who has insulin resistance and has diabetes already, cutting out fruit makes a big difference in lowering the blood sugar. So I think a lot of what Dr. Ostfeld's talking about is among otherwise healthy folks, maybe not a clinical population where you can change things, at least for a while, you can get lots of benefits. Again, how does this mean, how does not having grains mean that it's fake? I don't understand that. Again, the logic.
Beans and lentils, the pulses, also are associated with living longer. You leave all those things out, and then the ketogenic diet is helpful for people with refractory epilepsy in the pediatric population.
Right.
And it started in this group in the hospital because there's so many side effects. There's pages and pages of side effects. Heart arrhythmias, mineral deficiencies, cardiomyopathy, fractures, kidney stones. They take it, they're very careful with it.
Yeah, so I'm afraid Dr. Ostfeld falls victim to the idea that what I teach started as the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. I mean, the name's kind of similar. No. So what I teach is actually based on a different body of knowledge that goes back to the Banting diet in the 1860s. And by the 1920s, when the ketogenic diet was used by Wilder and his group at Hopkins, the diabetes internal medicine groups were using what we teach to treat diabetes, going back 100 years from in the 1920s. So it was actually different training, different teaching. The focus is on protein, not on making sure the macros are the same. And actually this kind of got glommed together in the current version of internet keto, where you might think that you have to be careful about macros every meal. No, you don't. So what I teach is actually more like the Banting, the Osler Allen, the Atkins, the Eads, Protein Power, the South Beach, that kind of teaching. It doesn't require macro counting or keto monitoring. And yes, for epilepsy, some children will have a seizure if they have a small taste of a candy bar. They have to be very careful about being in ketosis all the time. That's not what we teach.
I don't think a ketogenic diet is your friend. And as a cardiologist, I recommend my patients absolutely do not do it. Now,
so were you presented with any data? I'm very interesting to have a statement that's so strong. In fact, I hear people talk about danger, like you were on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall off. I'm a little more careful with my language if it might be unhealthy but danger, that's trying to persuade you with something other than science.
Why do people consider a ketogenic diet helpful? There are two general categories. One category is weight loss. The other category is diabetes. Now, in regard to weight loss, a ketogenic diet is helpful for short-term weight loss, but so is cocaine. And what happens is if you don't eat any carbs, you use up your glycogen stores in your body. That's what glucose is stored as, and that holds water. So you use them up. You pee out the water, lose a little weight. When you initially start a ketogenic diet, you get something called the keto flu, and you feel a little crummy, so you eat a little less. And then the ketones themselves are water avid, so they help you pee out fluid. So in the short term, you lose weight. But in meta-analyses of multiple randomized trials of weight loss with a keto diet versus a higher carb diet, there's really only about less than a kilogram of difference in weight loss.
So, time out. Not everyone gets the keto flu, and he's right about the water loss. You can get a 5 to 10 pound water loss depending on how much extra fluid you have, and most people love that early on. But then fat comes off as well. The people I've had lose over 100 pounds, it's not all water weight. And so that goes back to a study, I think in the 1980s, where they took people for 2 weeks, put them on a keto diet, and then refed them, and all the weight came back. And they even measured a measurement of water, but they didn't go beyond 2 weeks. So the purpose of that study was to show that it was just water loss. If you asked a doctor who had used this before, they would have said, well, of course, you keep them on it for more than 2 weeks, you keep them on it for a year, they'll lose 50 to 100 pounds. But no, the purpose of the study was to show that it didn't work. No, it still did work. So this is an interesting, if you want information about a keto diet, talk to someone who's used a keto diet. And Dr. Ostfeld, if I have a question about a plant-based diet, I'll come to you and ask you about it. But if you've never even prescribed it in your office, I don't think you really have the credibility to be able to say that it's not good for anybody and that everyone gets keto. In my estimate, about a third of people get keto, what we call keto adaptation, and 2/3 of people don't. And there are ways to mitigate the fluid shifts with adding salt if you don't have high blood pressure. Anyway, so it's like there are ways to get around these things in a clinic population. It's even easier if you don't have medical issues to do this on your own. But these are pretty strong words. My hunch is he's never even prescribed a keto diet before. Now, I might be wrong. It might have been a keto diet for epilepsy. And technically, that's a keto diet. But what we're talking about is a well-formulated ketogenic diet for obesity, diabetes, and metabolic issues.
And then, of course, you're leaving out all those healthy foods, and there's multiple mechanisms of potential harm when you're eating more of an animal-based ketogenic diet, from heme iron to impacting the microbiome, to sialic acid, to LDL cholesterol, to inflammation, to oxidative stress, to antioxidants. The list goes on. I'd be happy to take a deep dive into those.
So be careful with the language. You might have, or you may have, that kind of nagging fear is that brilliant. Most of these people use that, and I can see how you might be left with, well, it's something new, and just rest assured there are a lot of flights. Millions of people travel on air travel, but when that years ago someone had to first say, hey, maybe humans can have powered airplane flight.
Weight loss. So I look at the weight loss thing, to be honest, as fool's gold. Diabetes, a meta-analysis of large randomized trials, longer term, showed that there's no significant difference between a higher carb, low fat, and a ketogenic diet in terms of sugar control. Now,
so let's take this fallacy, or maybe the logic that doesn't make sense to me. It was used for obesity, it's used for diabetes. There are all these studies, and the low-carb diet didn't do any better than the high-carb diet. So the keto diet didn't do any better than the one we've been traditionally teaching. Therefore, it doesn't work? Or it's bad for you? No, wait a sec. In my clinical trials, I would always use an active control. Often we used the low-fat diet or the low-glycemic diet. So actually people got better in both groups, and in our hands, the low-carb diet, because we actually went to doctors and asked them what they did, worked better. But if you do a meta-analysis, that's right, they both worked fine. They both worked fine. So the researchers who went through the last 15 years who they don't study low-carb, but they'll say, yeah, sure, there's a seat at the table for the low-carb keto diet. There's enough evidence there. So just because it's as good as something, but not better, doesn't mean it doesn't work. So there's this implication of, well, because it's not better, therefore you don't do it. Or no, it's just another way to go about things. And that was the second time that sort of false conclusions, because it was no better, that means it doesn't work. No, because it was no better, it means it works. But in some hands, actually, it might be the only thing that's worked for you, because you tried low-fat diets, they never worked, and you tried the weight, whatever that is, and as you read recently, the diet company has now purchased a weight loss drug company. To me, that's tantamount to, meaning it's not definitely, but it's tantamount to saying that the Weight Watchers approach really didn't work well for many people, which was my clinical experience. And you can run a business having an effect on just a portion of the population, but so many people still come to me thinking because this other low-fat and point counting system didn't work for them, something was wrong with them. When they do a low-carb keto diet, everything works just perfectly because it wasn't the right metabolic fit. You want to be sure to try something, a diabetes reversal or a weight loss approach that fits your metabolism. And I have no qualms with, in fact, I've endorsed properly formulated vegan and vegetarian approaches if you're doing it with someone who can teach you how to do it well. I'm not against things that work, that have science behind it. But to say that it's no better than, therefore it doesn't work, really doesn't make sense, does it?
If you eat no sugar, your blood sugar levels will go down. But the issue is you're not necessarily reversing the underlying reason why you have the diabetes. We're talking about adult onset type 2 diabetes. You have diabetes in the first place. That's the insulin resistance. And you're just masking it by making it seem like your blood sugar is low. And what happens is...
Now, this one is pervasive through the, plant-based biased videos. Your doctor diagnoses diabetes by measuring your blood glucose, blood sugar. But if your blood sugar is normal, it's not true. Well, yes it is. So this is very interesting, and I finally figured it out, and that is, yes, if you eat carbs and fat and you gain weight and you have fat inside your pancreas, that fat is the culprit, but it was the dietary fat and carbs with the insulin going up to be able to store the fat that causes it. So yes, until your fat in your pancreas is gone, you may have insulin resistance, but using a low-carb diet cuts the weight as well, and so you're losing the fat in the pancreas. And so it's just a different mechanism that I think if you're in the old paradigm, you can't see. So fat in the food, fat on the artery is the logic, but that's not true. It's actually inflammation that sets the stage for the fat getting into the artery. So it's the dietary carb and insulin and dietary fat that actually contribute or make the insulin resistance in your organs. And so I can understand how you might not be able to see that there's another way to go about things, and you can actually reduce the blood sugar, reduce the insulin, and lose the weight and lose the fat in the pancreas. They might not be able to see that. And this is not the first time, probably not the last time, you're going to hear this, that fixing the blood sugar, oh no, that's not the answer. Yes, it is. That's how we diagnose diabetes. They're not measuring any, well, it might be the hemoglobin A1C, which is a function of that glucose. But there isn't anything other, there's no like little animal in there causing the insulin resistance, and that's not diabetes. It's what is the blood sugar doing?
And what happens is when you're eating more animal products, you get fat deposits in your muscle and your liver, causing insulin resistance, making it harder for the glucose to go from your blood.
And for the completeness, it's not just the animal fat, it's the calories. Calories matter, and it's the insulin signal from the carbs in the food that make the storage of the fat and or excess carbs into the fat into the organs. So I can see how, it's like blaming the hamburger, blaming the meat for the whole thing, which was the bread and the meat. When you take the bread away, you don't get the insulin signal, so it doesn't have the same metabolic effect. But everyone blames the meat for the problem when really it's the bun. So he's falling into that same sort of narrative where it's the fat in the food that goes to the fat and the you could say artery or pancreas, and that's really what causes diabetes. So reduce the animal fat, you'll fix the diabetes. Well, he may be true in the context of a carefully formulated vegetarian type of diet. If you're losing weight and you're fixing the fat in the organ itself, you will reverse the insulin resistance as well. So there are a couple ways to do it, at least 2 ways.
Into those places where it can be stored. Now, when you don't eat sugar, your blood sugar goes down, so it looks like you fixed the problem. But then when you sit within 6 feet of a donut, your blood sugar shoots up. So to me, reversing diabetes is not masking it, but actually being able to eat fruit, and whole grains and not having your blood sugar go up. And we do have data.
So there's another element that made me just kind of remember, and that is most doctors who have never had a weight problem will kind of make jokes about things. Or I don't think it's funny anymore, where if you are unable to resist the donut or whatever it is, that's a problem that can be actually a serious problem and not something to minimize. And in a weight loss clinic, when you're dealing with people who are at wit's end, have diabetes, and they're on 10 different medicines, they don't know what to do. The minimization of, oh, haha, you can't have a donut. No, this is a serious thing that it makes me think that the patient population that they're talking about is very different than mine, where you actually can sit within 6 feet of a donut if you don't eat carbs for a few days. It's just amazing. I mean, the hunger and the people call it willpower, but really what it is your body's burning fat so well, you really don't have the urge to reach out for that sweet thing anymore. Or you're using some sweetener that's not sugar as a substitution. But one element of these kinds of videos and the world that I live in that low-carb diets do great with is it's a selected group, a selection bias. And I've often thought that's why Dr. Atkins got in trouble, is that he was really talking about a group, the early diabetes and obesity group, they were coming to him. And if you don't know my story, I helped to validate the Atkins diet or the low-carb keto diet through our research at Duke. And it's just another way to go about it. If you still have that sort of old paradigm belief that it's bad, you just really haven't kept up with the science, or you've learned one way to do it and haven't felt like there's any need to learn any other way to do it, which I think is Dr. Ostfeld's situation.
From the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, where eating a plant-based diet can improve insulin resistance and improve beta.
So I thought this was about the keto diet. Oh, right, that switch. It's a fallacy. A plant-based diet can work. It doesn't mean an animal-based diet can't work. This is a false choice. I hope you see that. And I hope you've watched enough of these either to just kind of let it brush off the shoulder. So the logic is not true that if a plant-based diet is best or is good, no one's ever done a randomized trial of plant-based versus animal-based at a carb-restricted level, or for that matter, any sort of level of carbs. So you can't say a plant-based diet is best. You just can't, and be scientifically correct. So, but to even say that because plant-based works, therefore animal-based can't, it's just, makes no sense.
Resistance and improve beta cell or the pancreas's ability to make insulin. I'm not aware of any data to that effect with a ketogenic diet.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he hasn't read our research, which goes back over 20 years. And our teaching does not go back to the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. As a reminder, I see that misunderstanding perpetuated even by people who should know better. I mean, high-level dietitians and physicians who aren't really being precise about what keto means. But I could see why that's a problem. Keto means 100 different things today because of the blessing and the curse of the internet. So you want to be sure you get the information on how to do it correctly in a safe and effective manner. I hope that's helpful. If you like it, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, and why not send this to a friend who's worried about something out there about a keto diet. There's an old paradigm and a new paradigm, and talk to someone who has experience with a keto diet, not someone who just fear mongers about it. I guess that's my conclusion.